Well, good morning, everyone. The title of my talk this morning is Great Leadership in You and in Others. I suspect all of us would agree that one of the things that we need today in this world more than ever is great leadership. We need to see great leadership in ourselves. We need to see great leadership in others. We need to see great leadership across our community, society, and even the world. We need to see great leadership more than ever. And if we're going to face the challenges of today and tomorrow and the weeks, months, and even years ahead, we are going to need to see great leadership everywhere.
And if somebody was to ask me, what is the definition of great leadership, Philip, I have to be honest, I don't have a clue. I haven't a clue what a definition of a great leader is.
And I suspect nobody really does. There's thousands of books out there on leadership, and they've all got their different slant and take on what makes a great leader and how you would define a great leader. So I don't know. But what I'm going to share with you this morning is the three things that I have seen in all great leaders. I'm not a great leader, but these are the three things that I have seen in all great leaders across my life. Now, I thankfully have known a lot of great leaders, but the one great leader I'm going to talk to you about today is very, very special to me. It's my late father.
And in order to talk about my late father, we've got to go back 30 years. He passed away in 1993. So I'm going to take you back to June 1990. And in June 1990, at that time, my father was the director and the shareholder of an organization that was a large hotel group. We owned hotels in this part of the world, in GB
and in North America. It was a really, really large, fast-growing company of the 1980s. And in June 1990, I was sitting at home. My father was away in business in North America, looking after one of the hotels. He wasn't there for long. He was just there for a couple of weeks.
And he rang my mother. And my mum was on the phone with him for a short while, and the next thing I knew, my mum was coming up to my bedroom to tell me about the conversation they just had. And during that time, I don't know if you remember this, but I was playing the Commodore 64 computer. And if you're under 40 years old, you probably don't know what the Commodore 64 is. It was one of the computers of the 1980s. But if you're over 40 years old, like me, you probably had a Commodore 64. So I was sitting playing my Commodore 64 computer, and my mum came into my room and said to me, "We've got really, really bad news. I'm just off the phone with your father, and he's taken very, very ill. He's actually been taken into hospital, and he's been diagnosed with leukemia."
Now, I didn't know at the time, but I was soon to find out sometime later that he could have died within about 3 weeks. And at that time, my whole world just completely was turned upside down. And not only were we facing the illness of my father and all that came with that, but we were also facing a whole bunch of other challenges.
Around that time, we were also going into a very deep and very serious recession. It wasn't as bad as the Great Recession that we've gone through in the last number of years, but this was a particularly bad recession of the early 1990s.
And of course, at this part of the world, we were still in the middle of the Troubles, and that was also causing challenges for the business. And then we faced something else. Interest rates at that time were about 7%. And overnight, literally overnight, interest rates doubled from 7% to 15%. And the organization that my father was a director and shareholder of, it had huge borrowings. And a combination of those borrowings and the interest rates doubling in the middle of the Troubles, and indeed going into recession, the business collapsed. And the thing that really finished it off was one of the hotels actually blew up around that time. And so it couldn't really get much worse than that.
And so we had all these calamities going on. We had my father diagnosed with leukemia. He was literally given 3 weeks to live. Interest rates doubled. We were in the middle of the Troubles, and indeed we had gone into a very deep and very serious recession, and one of the hotels blew up. Now, as a result of all of that, my father's business collapsed. And it was one of the largest administration's business collapses of that particular time, and I think in the history of Belfast. It was a pretty shocking time. But miraculously, my father got healed. And I say the word miraculously, not lightly, but at that time, the church that he was involved in, they decided to pray for 24 hours that my father would be healed. And as sure as I'm standing here today, a week later when he went into hospital, they said to him, Ronnie, that's my father's name, you're in remission, you're healed. And my father was healed, but he had lost his business, he had lost everything, and he needed to get it all back.
So he went back to his offices. Now, his offices, some would maybe be familiar with this place. It's near Castle Court in Belfast city centre. And his offices were facing Castle Court. They were a place called Spencer House. And he was at the very top of that building. And he went back to his offices, and everybody had gone, the business had collapsed, but there was one or two people still there who were very loyal to my father. And he went back to his office, and he wanted to get a business up and running, so he did something very, very unusual. He rang Pizza Hut UK, and he said to the directors of Pizza Hut UK, I want to get a bunch of investors and shareholders together and bring the Pizza Hut franchise to this part of the world, both north and south, right across the whole island. Now, that may not seem particularly miraculous or amazing thing to do, but at that time, we barely had any franchise restaurants. Of course, today, Northern Ireland has lots of franchise restaurants, but back then, we didn't even have a McDonald's. McDonald's didn't come to Northern Ireland until 1994. Pizza Hut was set up in 1991.
And so Pizza Hut was, for that time, revolutionary. And it was pretty ahead of its time because we didn't even have a McDonald's. But not only that, the person bringing Pizza Hut to Northern Ireland was doing so in a very calamitous situation, as I'd said. He had just finished his chemotherapy, and now he was bringing the Pizza Hut franchise to Northern Ireland. So pretty amazing stuff. And between 1991 and 1993, he had set 4 Pizza Huts up in Northern Ireland and 1 in Dublin before he passed away in 1993. And the reason why I tell you this story, and the reason why I've told this story many, many times before, is because success is possible even in the most challenging of circumstances.
I mean, it doesn't get, as I said, more challenging than what my father was facing. I mean, he was facing personal challenge and indeed very severe economic challenges, and yet by showing great leadership, he was able to establish an organization and make it a roaring success in a relatively short space of time and leave a great legacy. And so that story reminds us that success is possible, and that story reminds us of what great leadership can indeed achieve. And if you're ever feeling a little bit weary and a little bit stressed and a little bit discouraged and struggling a little bit on your journey, why not drive past the Pizza Hut, grab yourself a pizza, and remind yourself of the guy who brought Pizza Hut to Northern Ireland. Against all the odds, he was able to make it a success by showing great leadership. So what did I learn from my father, and what did I learn from others regarding great leadership? Well, here's the 3 things that I see in all great leaders. The first thing is, if you want to be a great leader, you have to have a desire to make the world a little bit better, a better place. And, you can be a fine leader if you don't want to do that. If you just want to turn a profit, make a little bit of money, there's nothing wrong with that. Be a fine leader. Be a good leader. But if you want to be a great leader, you must have a desire in your heart to make the world just that little bit better.
We need as many people out there as possible wanting to make the world just that little bit better.
And there's a number of ways in which we can make the world a little bit better, many ways to do that. But the one way I think we can do that, and it doesn't cost anything, is this. When you go into an environment as a leader, you need to love the people that you lead. Now, that may seem a very strange thing to say, love the people that you lead. I mean, what are you getting at? Well, the true meaning of the word love is sacrifice, right? I mean, if you really want to know how much somebody loves you, the degree of sacrifice that they make for you will determine how much they love you. And so as a leader, if you have that sacrificial love in the environment that you lead, then you're going to help people, aren't you? You're going to encourage them. You're going to support them. You're going to make sacrifices for them. You're going to want to build them up. You're going to want to encourage them. And you may even carry some of their burdens if you love them. And if you create that environment, everybody's going to love one another, make sacrifices for one another. And in that type of environment that people love, they're not going to want to go anywhere. They're going to want to stay in that organization and make it a great organization. So that sorts out the employee retention problem. And if it's an organization that people love, then people are going to be drawn to that company. They're going to be drawn to it. And that's going to sort out the employee recruitment problem. And customers, they're going to want to be drawn to that organization because they love it. And that sorts out the sales problem. And those customers are going to want to stay and be loyal to your organization because they love it. And that sorts out the customer turnover problem. And so if you create an environment of that sacrificial love, then you're going to create an environment that is truly great and will create greatness both in you and indeed others, and will make a real difference in the world. If you create an environment that people love, then you will create an amazing organization. No matter how small it is and no matter how large it is, you will create an amazing organization. The second thing I see in all great leaders is people who are really comfortable with their weaknesses. Now, that may seem a strange thing because great leaders are supposed to want to spend 10,000 hours developing those areas that they're weak in. Forget that. You don't have 10,000 hours. You don't have the time. But great leaders are really, really relaxed about their weaknesses. It may seem a strange thing and it's almost counterintuitive, but they actually are humble people. Now that may seem strange because you think, well, most great leaders would be quite, self-reliant and quite filled with pride. But if you think about the problem with pride, pride typically leads to arrogance. And arrogance typically leads to complacency, and complacency usually leads to egotistical behavior, and egotistical behavior typically leads to downfall. So pride and self-belief actually aren't that great. The greatest leaders that I have known are people who are humble and have that desire to ask for help. They recognize their weakness, they know their weakness, and they're comfortable with their weaknesses. And because of that, and as a result of that, what they tend to do is they surround themselves with people who are greater than they are, that compensate for their weaknesses. So great leaders typically are surrounded by even greater teams, exceptional people. And if you're not comfortable with your weaknesses, and we've probably known managers and leaders like this, they're very, very hard to work for. They tend to keep you at a distance. They tend to be particularly bad at communicating. And they also tend to recruit people who are not as good as they are. A people recruit B people recruit C people recruit D people, and you see the direction we're going. That's no good. If you want to be a great leader, then you'll be really relaxed about your weaknesses. And you will bring in people who are better than you in the areas that you're weak in, and they will be exceptional in the areas that you're just very comfortable about not being good at. And you will surround yourself with amazing people that will be able to achieve great things. And thirdly and finally, what else do I see in all great leaders? Well, I see great leaders who have a desire to make a difference, to make the world a little bit better. They're comfortable with their weaknesses. And thirdly and finally, this is what I see in all great leaders. They have a desire to be made redundant. Now, that is something that we will all struggle with because we all want to be needed, don't we? We all want to be relevant. We all want to be important. We all want to be needed. We all want to know that when we head off on holidays for 2 weeks in Magaluf and leave the organization behind, that we are going to be so needed that the organization is going to shudder in our absence. That's kind of what we want, isn't it? We want to be relevant. We want to be needed. And that's okay. Do that. But if you want to be a great leader, and if you want to create greatness in both you and others, you need to have that redundancy strategy. When you go into an environment that you lead, then you're going to be wanting to be made redundant. In other words, create an environment, create an organization that will survive and thrive without your input. Because we know, as leaders, that we're only here for a short time. And if we want to create greatness and a really good legacy, then we have got to create an environment that does not require us. And when you go into that environment, you'll then want to delegate, you'll want to empower, you'll want to inspire, you want to build up world-class teams and input great organizational structures and systems that will be efficient and effective and will survive and indeed thrive in the future without your input. And so that's my story. My inspiration is my father.
He is the greatest leader that I've ever known, but I'm his son, so I'm biased. But if you're ever feeling a little bit weary, a little bit discouraged, struggling a little bit, why not drive past the Pizza Hut and remember the guy who brought it here? That might just inspire you for the day. Remembering that against all the odds and all the challenges that he faced, he was able to bring Pizza Hut to Northern Ireland during the Troubles, with all the economic calamities that were going on there, with his business collapse, with his health in a really, really bad way. But he was able to bring Pizza Hut to Northern Ireland and make a powerful success of it, using great leadership. And what do I see in all great leaders? These are the three things I think we all need if we want to be great leaders. Let's make the world just that little bit better. How do we do it? It'll cost nothing. Just love the people that you lead. Make sacrifices for them. The true sense, the true meaning of love. And you will create an environment that others will love one another. And in doing that, you will create a great organization. Be comfortable with your weaknesses. Maybe for the first time in your life, be relaxed about the areas that you're weak in. Don't try to develop them. Don't spend 10,000 hours trying to compensate for your weaknesses. Just surround yourself with amazing people who can create great leadership, not just in you, but in others.
And thirdly and finally, have that redundancy strategy. Go into an environment with a desire to no longer be needed. And if you do that, you will create greatness in people and in teams and in the organization that will achieve amazing things now and in the future. So be a great leader, both in yourself and in others. And if you do that, then you will make the world just that little bit better. Thank you.